The windshield wipers were losing. That was the first thing I realized somewhere deep in the North Carolina mountains, while rain slammed against my car hard enough to blur the road into gray streaks. The second thing I realized, I should have turned around an hour ago. Flash flood warning remains in effect. I shut the radio off violently. I couldn't listen to another warning tonight. Not from weather stations. Not from my mother asking if I was handling the breakup maturely. Not from friends who kept saying Ava probably didn't mean to hurt me. Cheating always sounded accidental when people weren't the ones bleeding from it. Lightning cracked across the sky suddenly, illuminating towering trees along the mountain road for half a second before darkness swallowed everything again. My grip tightened around the steering wheel. The road curved sharply ahead. Water rushed across parts of the pavement now, shallow but fast enough to make my stomach tense. Perfect. Exactly how every great life decision starts. My phone buzzed again in the passenger seat. Ava. Fifth call tonight. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing, then immediately started again. I laughed once under my breath. Unbelievable. 3 weeks ago, she cried while apologizing in my apartment kitchen. 2 days later, she posted photos at a rooftop bar with the same woman she swore meant nothing. And somehow, I was still the one expected to answer the phone. Another violent crack of thunder shook the car hard enough to make me flinch. Then headlights appeared, suddenly ahead through the rain. A roadside hotel. Small, old, half hidden between trees and fog. The glowing vacancy sign flickered weakly, like even it was reconsidering its choices. I pulled into the lot immediately. Rain hammered the roof as I jumped out of the car with my duffel bag over my shoulder, soaking through my hoodie within seconds. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly like coffee and wet wood. Warm, quiet, safe. For exactly 3 seconds, because someone else was already standing at the front desk. Tall woman, dark coat dripping rainwater onto the floor. Black boots. Sharp posture. One hand resting against the counter while the exhausted hotel manager typed nervously into an old computer. She glanced sideways when I walked in. Calm, unreadable. The kind of face that looked dangerous to argue with. Unfortunately, exhaustion made me reckless. I need a room, I said immediately. So do I, the woman replied smoothly. Her voice was low, controlled, annoyingly attractive. The hotel manager swallowed hard before looking between us. There's only one left. Silence. Thunder rattled the windows behind us. I dropped my soaked duffel bag beside the desk harder than necessary. Fine, I said. Give it to her. The woman crossed her arms instantly. No, I frowned. No? You were speaking first, she replied. Finish. That irritated me immediately. You sure about that? Because it sounded like you wanted the room. I do. Then take it. You clearly need it more. What's that supposed to mean? Her eyes moved over me once. Rain-soaked hoodie, exhausted expression, death grip on my car keys. You look one inconvenience away from a breakdown. My jaw tightened. The worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong. The manager cleared his throat nervously. The storm's getting worse. Roads are flooding fast. Lightning flashed violently outside. Then, you can share the room, he said carefully, or spend the night trapped on the mountain. The woman beside me sighed softly like she already hated this, then looked directly at me for the first time. Cold eyes, sharp mouth, entirely too attractive for someone currently ruining my evening. Fine, she said flatly. I stared at her. Fine. I'm not dying on a mountain road because you're difficult. And somehow, that irritated me enough to forget the storm completely. Room 214 was at the very end of the second floor, beside a flickering ice machine that sounded like it was actively suffering. Perfect atmosphere for murder. The hotel manager handed over a single brass key while avoiding eye contact, like he knew exactly how badly this arrangement could end. Extra blankets are in the closet, he muttered, then disappeared immediately. Coward. I grabbed my duffel bag and headed upstairs without waiting for the woman beside me. Unfortunately, she matched my pace easily. "You always stomp when irritated?" she asked calmly behind me. "You always talk to strangers this much?" "Only the loud ones." I shot her a glare over my shoulder. She didn't react, which somehow made it worse. By the time we reached room 214, rain hammered against the hallway windows hard enough to shake them slightly. Thunder rolled through the mountains seconds later, low and violent. I unlocked the door first, then immediately regretted everything. The room was tiny. One bed, one couch, one lamp, one problem. "You take the couch," the woman said instantly as she stepped inside. I laughed once in disbelief while dropping my bag near the wall. "That's interesting." "What?" "You volunteering to share the room somehow turned into you owning it." She removed her soaked coat slowly, draping it over the chair near the window. "I got here first." "No," I replied. "You argued first." "That too." God, she was annoying. And unfortunately, unfairly attractive. The fitted black shirt underneath her coat made that increasingly difficult to ignore. Tall, lean, controlled in a way that felt dangerous, like she never lost arguments because she never lost composure. Meanwhile, I was standing there soaked, exhausted, and emotionally held together by caffeine and unresolved rage. Her eyes lifted suddenly, caught me staring instantly. "Problem?" she asked smoothly. I looked away immediately. "No." Good. That only made it worse somehow. I yanked open the closet, aggressively searching for blankets. "One pillow," I muttered. "Tragic." "You're enjoying this?" "A little." I turned sharply. "You don't even know me." "No," she agreed calmly while sitting on the edge of the bed to remove her boots. "But I know you sigh dramatically every 30 seconds. That's because this situation sucks. You're alive, dry and indoors during a flood warning." She glanced toward the storm outside. Perspective helps. Lightning flashed bright enough to illuminate the entire room white for half a second. Thunder exploded immediately afterward. Instinctively, my shoulders tightened. The woman noticed. Of course she noticed. But instead of commenting, she simply leaned back against the headboard, watching me carefully. Too carefully. "You got a name?" I asked finally. A pause. Then, "Vale." Of course it was. That sounded less like a real name and more like someone who ruins lives professionally. I told her mine quietly. She repeated it once under her breath. Slowly, like she was testing how it sounded. My stomach betrayed me immediately. Bad sign. Very bad sign. Before I could recover from that unfortunate reaction, the lights flickered violently overhead. Once. Twice. Then the entire room dropped into darkness. Outside, thunder cracked so hard the windows shook. And somewhere beside me, Vale laughed softly. "Perfect," I muttered into the darkness. Rain battered the windows hard enough to sound like handfuls of gravel hitting the glass. Somewhere outside, wind howled through the mountains in sharp, uneven bursts. Then another crack of thunder split the sky open. I flinched automatically. A soft click came from somewhere near the bed. Phone flashlight. The beam landed directly on me. "You hate storms," Vale said calmly. "I hate being stranded with strangers." That wasn't a denial. I rubbed a hand over my face. "Congratulations. You solved the mystery." Vale angled the flashlight toward the ceiling instead of directly at me this time, softening the room into dim shadows and silver light. It somehow made her look worse. Or better. Depends how dangerous you considered beautiful women in blackout conditions. She sat cross-legged against the headboard now, dark hair still slightly damp around her shoulders. Relaxed posture, completely unbothered by the storm trying to destroy the mountain outside. Meanwhile, I was one thunderclap away from developing a cardiac condition. "You always this calm?" I asked while sitting carefully on the far end of the couch. "Yes." "That's unsettling." "I've been told." Lightning flashed violently through the curtains. Thunder hit almost immediately afterward. Again, my body betrayed me with a visible tension in my shoulders. Vale noticed instantly. "You grabbed the couch cushion that time." "I grabbed balance." That tiny sound felt suspiciously like amusement. I narrowed my eyes at her through the darkness. "You enjoying this?" "A little." "You're kind of rude. You're kind of dramatic." "Look outside," I snapped lightly. "The sky sounds angry." "The sky isn't the problem." I frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Vale studied me quietly for a second too long before answering. "You were tense before the storm started." The honesty landed harder than expected. I looked away first. Bad decision. Because once silence settled between us, the storm suddenly sounded louder. My brain immediately filled the space with things I didn't want to think about. Ava crying in my kitchen. Ava saying it didn't mean anything. Ava asking why I couldn't just move on. Thunder cracked again. I inhaled sharply before I could stop myself. Vale's expression softened slightly. First real softness all night. "You know," she said quietly, "you don't have to pretend you're okay every second." "I'm not pretending." "You've been clenching your jaw for 20 minutes. That irritated me mostly because it was true. I leaned back harder into the couch cushions. "You analyze everybody this much?" "Only people who look like they're about to drive into a hurricane instead of dealing with their feelings." I stared at her. That was weirdly specific. Was I wrong? Unfortunately, no. And somehow the fact that she saw through me that quickly felt more exposing than the darkness did. Rain slammed harder against the windows. The room temperature dropped noticeably. Cold air crept slowly through somewhere near the old window frame. I rubbed my hands together instinctively. Vale noticed that too. God, this woman observed everything. "The heater's dead with the power," she said. "Fantastic." Another flash of lightning illuminated the room briefly. This time I caught her watching me openly. Not judgmental, not mocking, just attentive, which honestly felt more dangerous, because anger was easier to handle than kindness. Then thunder exploded directly overhead, loud enough to rattle the walls. I jumped hard at the sound, and Vale smiled. Small, quick. The first real smile I'd seen from her all night. Dangerous development. By midnight, the room felt freezing. Not uncomfortable. Actually, freezing. Cold air slipped steadily through the old window frame, while the storm outside kept hammering the mountains without mercy. I sat curled deeper into the couch blanket, wearing my hoodie under 2 extra layers, and still shivering. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. Vale glanced over from the bed where she sat, reading something on her phone, like she wasn't trapped inside a haunted weather documentary. "I can see your breath." "I know. No point pretending the couch is warm anymore." I looked up slowly. She held my gaze calmly. "Oh no, absolutely not." "You're serious? You'd rather freeze?" "I'd rather survive this night without becoming a cautionary tale." One corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "You think I'm going to murder you?" "I don't know you." "That's fair." Thunder cracked violently overhead again. I flinched before I could stop myself. Vale noticed instantly. Of course she did. Then she sighed softly and pulled back part of the blanket beside her. "Get over here." My heart betrayed me immediately. I'm fine. You're shivering hard enough to shake the couch. I'm cold. That is literally my point. I hesitated too long, which apparently counted as agreement because Vale set her phone aside and waited with the patience of someone who already knew she'd win the argument eventually. Annoying. Extremely annoying. Another blast of thunder rattled the windows. I stood immediately. Okay, I muttered, but this is survival, not bonding. Whatever helps you sleep. I grabbed my blanket and crossed the room cautiously before sliding onto the very edge of the mattress. Every nerve in my body became aggressively aware of the situation instantly. The bed suddenly felt microscopic. Vale stayed on her side initially, one arm tucked beneath her head, while Rain tapped steadily against the windows beside us. Silence stretched. Not awkward exactly. Worse. Aware. I could feel warmth radiating from her even without touching. Could smell faint traces of rainwater and something clean underneath it. My body hated how quickly it relaxed around her. You're still tense, Vale murmured quietly. You're still talking. A soft huff of laughter escaped her. The sound did something dangerous to my stomach. Lightning flashed bright across the room. Thunder followed immediately after. I inhaled sharply. Again. Vale shifted slightly beside me. You jump every time. I'm aware. You scared of storms or loud things in general? I'm considering being scared of you, actually. Reasonable. Another silence settled. Then colder air slipped through the room again, making me shiver visibly. Vale noticed. Of course. Without saying anything, she reached over and pulled more blanket around me carefully. Her hand brushed my waist accidentally. Warm fingers. Brief contact. But neither of us moved away immediately. The air changed instantly. Heavy. Charged. My breathing caught embarrassingly fast. Vale's hand lingered 1 second too long before pulling back slowly. You tense up every time I touch you, she said quietly into the dark. That's not true. It is. Thunder rolled low through the mountains again. Closer this time. I stared at the ceiling, trying very hard not to think about the fact that Vale was only inches away now. You always notice everything? I asked softly. Yes. That sounds exhausting. It's useful. Her voice had changed. Lower now. Softer. And somehow that made the darkness feel more intimate than the bed itself. Then she asked quietly, Who hurt you that badly? And somehow, that question scared me more than the storm outside ever could. The storm quieted for maybe 30 seconds, just enough silence for her question to settle heavily between us. Who hurt you that badly? I stared at the ceiling while thunder rolled somewhere farther down the mountains now. Softer but still constant. Vale waited. Didn't pressure. Didn't fill the silence trying to rescue me from it. And somehow that patience made answering harder. My ex cheated, I said finally. Simple words. Ugly memory. Vale stayed still beside me. So you drove into a flood warning about it? A quiet laugh escaped me before I could stop it. When you say it out loud, it sounds unstable. It sounds painful. That landed differently. I swallowed hard. She acted like I was dramatic for being upset, I admitted carefully, which honestly might have been the worst part. Vale turned slightly toward me in the dark. How? She kept saying it didn't mean anything. I stared down at the blanket twisted in my hands. Like betrayal was somehow less awful because she didn't care enough about the other person. Another long silence. Then, she's stupid. The words hit me so directly, I laughed softly again. That's the second time someone said that to me recently. Then it's probably true. I turned my head slightly toward her. Lightning flashed briefly through the curtains, illuminating the sharp line of her jaw before darkness swallowed it again. You know, I murmured, You're weirdly comforting for someone who insulted me within 30 seconds of meeting me. You were being difficult. There it is. Vale smirked faintly. Dangerous. Very dangerous. The mattress shifted slightly as she leaned back against the headboard again. What happened after? She asked quietly. She cried. She apologized. People usually do once consequences show up. The bitterness in her voice caught my attention immediately. I looked toward her carefully. You sound experienced? For the first time all night, Vale hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely there, but real. My last relationship, she said slowly, lasted 3 years longer than it should have. The honesty surprised me. You loved her? Yes. The answer came too fast, too certain, and somehow that told me everything. What happened? Vale exhaled quietly through her nose. I spent most of the relationship making excuses for behavior that should have ended it much earlier. Something tightened painfully in my chest at that, because I understood it immediately. Not the details, the feeling, the slow erosion of yourself while trying to keep someone else comfortable. She cheated too? I asked softly. No. Vale looked toward the storm-dark window. She just liked making me feel hard to love. That sentence shattered something inside me. Because people talk about heartbreak like it happens suddenly. But sometimes heartbreak is gradual. Sometimes it's someone teaching you that needing softness makes you inconvenient. And once someone teaches you that long enough, you start apologizing for your existence before they even ask. Thunder cracked again overhead. This time I barely reacted, because I was too focused on the ache in Vale's voice. Without thinking too hard about it, I reached carefully beneath the blankets until my fingers brushed hers. Warm, still. Vale looked down immediately. I should have pulled away. Instead, I let my hand stay there. Slowly, her fingers intertwined with mine. The contact felt terrifyingly intimate in the darkness. Not sexual. Worse. Safe. You know what your problem is? Vale murmured quietly. I huffed softly. Feels like a long list. You keep bracing for impact. My throat tightened instantly. Vale's thumb brushed lightly across my knuckles. You don't have to do that here. The softness in her voice nearly undid me. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains again. But for the first time that night, I wasn't listening to the storm anymore, because Vale was only inches away now, close enough that I could feel her breathing. And neither of us moved back. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, emotionally, like the darkness itself had moved closer around us. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, but the storm had shifted now. Less violent, more distant. Meanwhile, my heartbeat had become the loudest thing in the room. Vale's hand still held mine beneath the blankets. Warm, steady, dangerously grounding. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then lightning flashed briefly through the curtains again, illuminating her face just enough for me to realize how close she actually was. Too close. Close enough that I could feel warmth from her skin. Close enough that if either of us moved slightly, my breathing caught. Vale noticed immediately. Of course she did. You okay? She asked quietly. No, I admitted, before thinking better of it. A small smile touched her mouth. Not smug. Soft. That somehow made it worse. You're honest when you're tired, she murmured. You make me nervous? That's not the same thing. Feels related. Thunder rolled low outside again. This time I barely flinched, because Vale's thumb brushed slowly against my hand beneath the blanket, and suddenly my entire nervous system was focused on that instead. God. This was a terrible idea. A woman I met 5 hours ago. Stranded in a storm. Emotionally unstable. Exactly the kind of situation people regret later. And yet, I couldn't remember the last time someone touched me carefully. Not casually, carefully, like they were paying attention to whether I pulled away. Vale shifted slightly closer against the pillow. Can I ask you something? You've been doing that all night. A quiet laugh escaped her. The sound warmed something deep in my chest. When your ex hurt you, Vale said softly, did you miss her or just miss being wanted? The question hit hard enough to steal my breath, because I knew immediately, and apparently my silence answered for me. Vale studied my face quietly in the dim flashes of stormlight. That's what I thought. I swallowed hard. That's a horrible thing to realize about yourself. No, she corrected gently. It's a lonely thing. The tenderness in her voice cracked something open inside me. Before I could think better of it, I turned toward her fully. Big mistake. Now our faces were inches apart. Close enough that I could see the exact moment her breathing changed too. The air shifted instantly. Heavy. Charged. Vale's gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then back to my eyes, giving me time, giving me choice. That nearly ruined me more than if she'd just kissed me immediately. You keep looking at me like you want to say something, she murmured. I'm trying not to. Why? Because this feels reckless. It probably is. Neither of us moved away. Thunder cracked loudly overhead again. And maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the overwhelming ache of spending too long feeling unwanted. But the second Vale lifted her hand carefully to my jaw. I leaned into it. Her expression changed instantly. Softer now. Hungrier too. You sure? She whispered. I answered by kissing her first. Fast. Impulsive. Weeks of heartbreak crashed into one terrible decision all at once. Vale reacted immediately. Her hand slid behind my neck as she kissed me back harder, pulling me closer beneath the blankets while thunder shook the windows around us. The kiss deepened fast. Messy breathing. Warm hands. The sharp, overwhelming relief of being touched like I mattered again. I gasped softly when Vale shifted over me slightly, her body pressing carefully against mine. Still thinking about your ex? She murmured against my mouth. No. Good. She kissed me again, slower this time. Thorough. Intentional. Like she wanted me to feel every second of it. Outside, lightning split the mountains bright white. Inside, Vale's fingers slid carefully along my waist beneath my hoodie. Every nerve ending in my body lit up instantly. But even then, even while kissing me hard enough to blur my thoughts completely, she still paused long enough to whisper, "Tell me if you want me to stop." That nearly destroyed me, because my ex used to touch me like access was automatic. Vale touched me like permission mattered. So instead of answering with words, I pulled her closer, and somewhere beneath the fading storm, she kissed me like she already understood exactly how much healing hurt. Morning arrived like it didn't know what had happened last night. Soft light, clean air. No thunder. No violence. Just silence so calm it almost felt suspicious. I woke up slowly, still tangled in unfamiliar warmth, before my brain fully remembered where I was. Then I felt it. An arm loosely draped around my waist. Still there. Still real. Vale was beside me. Asleep. Breathing steady. Calm in a way that made last night feel almost unreal in comparison. My chest tightened immediately. Not panic. Something worse. Awareness. Because it was one thing to kiss someone in a storm when the world felt like it was falling apart. It was another thing entirely to wake up next to them when the world had already stopped falling. Vale shifted slightly, her grip on my waist tightening instinctively, like even in sleep she didn't want distance. That alone did something dangerous to my thoughts. "You're staring again," she murmured, without opening her eyes. I froze. "You're awake?" Yes. A pause. Then she finally opened one eye lazily. You always look like you're about to apologize for existing in the morning. That's a very specific observation. I'm accurate. I exhaled, dropping my head back into the pillow. This is weird. Which part? All of it. A small pause. Then she adjusted slightly, now fully awake, still not moving away. You regret it? The question landed heavier than expected. I hesitated too long. That was enough answer. Vale watched me carefully, not judging, just reading. Then she nodded once, like she understood something unspoken. Good, she said quietly. I frowned. Good? If you didn't feel anything, I would have misread you. That should have made things easier. It didn't. Instead, it made my chest feel tighter. My phone buzzed suddenly on the nightstand. Too loud. Too sharp. I already knew before looking. Ava. Again. Vale's eyes flicked toward it immediately. Then back to me. No comment. No pressure. Just awareness. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The silence between us felt heavier than the ringing phone. Then I picked it up, unlocked it. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled. I felt annoyed. That was new. I blocked the number without opening the message. Deleted the thread. No hesitation. Just done. When I set the phone back down, Vale was still watching me. You did that fast? She said. It felt overdue. A pause. Then she shifted slightly closer. Not invading, just present. Good, she repeated softly. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist in a different way than last night did. Not adrenaline, not panic. Something quieter, safer. I turned slightly toward her. You always this calm after whatever that was? A faint smirk. You mean you kissing me in the middle of emotional chaos? My face went warm instantly. I didn't say it like that. You didn't have to. Silence again. But it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. That was the problem. Comfort was starting to replace confusion, and comfort was more dangerous than storms. Vale stretched slightly beside me, gaze drifting toward the window where sunlight was now fully spilling across the room. The roads are open, she said. That should have been the signal. Leave. Return to normal life. Go back to everything before her. Instead, I didn't move. Neither did she. We just stayed there in the aftermath of something neither of us had named yet. And for the first time since the storm started, leaving didn't feel like the obvious next step. It felt like a choice. And I wasn't ready to make it yet. The hotel hallway smelled different in daylight. Less like panic. More like something temporary pretending to be normal. Checkout was technically in 2 hours. Nobody said it out loud, but both of us knew it. Vale leaned against the reception desk, while I stood a few feet behind her, pretending I wasn't thinking about staying longer than I should. The receptionist barely looked up. Roads are open now, she said. Translation? Leave. Vale nodded once, then turned toward me. No pressure. No push. Just waiting. That was the worst part. Because pressure would have been easier to resist. This wasn't pressure. This was choice. You going back today? She asked. I hesitated. I don't know. A pause. Then her voice lowered slightly. That usually means no. I let out a quiet laugh. You're very confident in reading people. I'm rarely wrong. We stepped outside together into cool morning air. The storm was gone completely now. The mountains looked almost peaceful, like nothing violent had ever happened there. Like I hadn't met someone who changed the way silence felt in a single night. We ended up in a small diner 10 minutes down the road because neither of us said no fast enough. That was becoming a pattern. The diner was empty except for a waitress humming behind the counter, and an old TV playing muted morning news. Coffee came too fast. Food came too warm. Everything felt too normal after last night. Vale sat across from me, sleeves rolled slightly, watching me like she was still trying to understand what kind of person I was in daylight. "You're quieter today," she said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" I hesitated. "About how last night doesn't feel real anymore." Her gaze didn't shift. It was real. That landed heavier than I expected. I stared down at my coffee. "I don't usually do that," I admitted. Vale raised an eyebrow slightly. "Kissing strangers during storms?" "Trusting strangers during storms." A beat. Then she leaned back slightly. "You trusted me before that." I looked up. "I did not." "You did," she said calmly. "You just didn't notice when it happened." That should have scared me. Instead, it didn't, because she wasn't wrong. Something had shifted last night. Not all at once, piece by piece. Small moments I didn't question until it was too late to undo them. The waitress refilled our cups without asking. Vale thanked her. Simple, polite, normal, which somehow made everything between us feel more complicated. After a while, she spoke again. "I don't usually let people stay close like that." I frowned slightly. "Like what?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "Close enough to matter." The words didn't land loudly. They didn't need to. They just settled. Heavy, honest. My chest tightened slightly. "That sounds lonely," I said quietly. "It's efficient." That didn't answer my question. A faint pause. Then, "It's safer." Silence stretched between us again, but softer now, less defensive, more aware. When we finally left the diner, the air outside felt warmer than it should have. We walked without direction for a while. No urgency, no destination. Just space between conversations that somehow didn't feel empty. At one point, I realized she was walking slightly closer than before. Not touching. Just close enough that if I slowed down, she would too. That realization alone made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't fully understand yet. "You always this quiet in the morning?" I asked. "I adjust to the company." "That sounds like a compliment." "It is." I laughed under my breath. She noticed immediately. Of course she did. "You laugh differently today," she said. "Is that bad?" "No." A pause. Then, "It sounds like you're not trying to survive something while doing it." That stopped me mid-step, because she was right. And I didn't know when that changed. We ended up back at the hotel later than we meant to. Neither of us commented on it. Neither of us suggested leaving immediately. That silence said enough. Inside the room, I noticed something strange. It didn't feel small anymore. It felt familiar. Vale set her bag down slowly, then looked at me. "So," she said, "what now?" The question wasn't casual. It wasn't playful. It was real. I stared at her for a long moment, then answered honestly, "I don't want this to end yet." A pause. Her expression didn't change much, but something softened in her eyes. That's not an answer people usually say out loud. I'm not usually in situations like this. Me neither. Silence again. Different this time. Heavier in meaning. Not awkward. Possibility. Vale stepped closer slightly. Not closing distance fully. Just enough. "You know," she said quietly, "this is the part where people usually make things complicated." I swallowed. "Are we not supposed to?" A faint, almost smile. "I didn't say that." Outside, sunlight shifted across the mountains like the storm had never existed. But inside that room, something had already changed shape. And neither of us was pretending otherwise anymore. We didn't leave immediately. That was the first decision neither of us challenged. Instead, we stayed in the room like time had forgotten to collect us. Vale sat near the window while I stood by the bed, pretending I wasn't aware of how aware I was of her. Outside, the mountains looked too peaceful again, like they hadn't held a storm that rewired something inside me. "You're thinking too hard again," Vale said. "I don't know how not to." "That's not true." I turned toward her slightly. "It feels true." A pause. Then she patted the space beside her on the bed. Not commanding, not insisting, just offering. I hesitated, then sat. The mattress dipped slightly under my weight, and suddenly the distance between us felt smaller than it had all morning. Vale didn't touch me. Not yet. But her presence did something worse. It settled. Like it belonged there. "You're leaving today?" I asked quietly. "I should." "That's not what I asked." She exhaled slowly. "No," she admitted. My chest tightened slightly at that answer, because it meant we were both standing in the same place neither of us had planned for. Silence stretched. Comfortable. Dangerous. Then my phone buzzed again. Instinctively, I tensed. But this time, it wasn't Ava. It was work. Normal life trying to reattach itself to me like nothing had happened. I didn't pick it up immediately. Vale noticed. "Don't answer it," she said. I looked at her. "Why?" "Because you're not there right now. That's not how responsibility works. It is when you're finally breathing properly." That landed harder than it should have. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it face down. Not ignored. Just paused. Vale watched me carefully. "You're changing," she said quietly. "That sounds dramatic." "It is." A faint pause. Then she added softer. "But it's also true." My throat tightened slightly, because I knew she wasn't talking about the phone. We both knew what she meant. I shifted slightly closer without thinking. Dangerous instinct. She didn't move away. That was worse. "Last night felt intense," I said carefully. "But today feels worse." That earned a faint look from her. "Worse?" "Not bad," I corrected quickly. "Just real." Vale leaned back slightly against the headboard. Her voice softened. "Intensity is easy," she said. "Reality takes longer." That sentence sat between us like something fragile. I nodded slowly. "I don't usually stay after intensity," I admitted. Her gaze lifted to mine. "Neither do I." That was the first time she sounded uncertain. Just for a second. Then it passed. But I heard it. We both did. Silence returned. Different now. Less storm. More awareness. I looked at her properly for the first time without adrenaline or chaos or distraction. Really looked. The calm didn't feel distant anymore. It felt intentional. Like she chose it. Like she chose me sitting here instead of walking away. That thought alone made my pulse uneven. "You're going to leave eventually," I said quietly. Vale didn't answer immediately. Then, "Yes." Honest. No cushioning. It should have hurt more than it did. But instead it clarified something. "So am I," I admitted. A pause. Then she nodded. "Then don't pretend this has to be permanent to matter." That stopped me completely, because it stripped away the pressure I hadn't admitted I was feeling. The idea that something either becomes forever or becomes nothing. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. Then Vale stood slowly. "I have a question," she said. I looked up. "Go ahead." "Do you regret last night?" The question should have been simple. It wasn't. I thought about it honestly. The storm. The fear. The kiss. The way she looked at me like I wasn't something to fix or tolerate, but something to notice. Then I shook my head. "No." Vale studied me for a moment, then nodded once. "Good." A beat. Then she added, "Me neither." That should have been the end. But it wasn't, because neither of us moved away. Not yet. Outside, the mountains stayed quiet. Inside, something unfamiliar settled between us. Not chaos, not escape. Something slower. Something choosing to stay long enough to see what it becomes. And for the first time since the storm began, leaving wasn't the only ending available anymore. It was just one of them.